I'm here with Michelle Cortese, who is an instructor at NYU and also a VR AR design lead at Facebook. And Michelle has, among her other experiences, designed and run a course for a theater group at NYU that was done in virtual reality. And that's, I think, going to be the focus of our talk today. So Michelle, thanks for spending the time with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Great, so that's great. It's great to be here, and you have an interesting background, and I'm particularly, of course, interested in what you've been doing recently at NYU. So, if you can tell me a little bit, a little bit about yourself, and then just sort of the origins of this course.
Sure. Well, the course came out of the Brendan Bradley Technology Lab at the NYU Tisch School of Drama. I was approached by Brendan Bradley to come on while they were turning the lab from a lab into a class to just find some kind of experimental usage that drama students could activate technology through, whether they were using technology to augment their work or they were sort of executing the work within technology itself. Because I work in VR, specifically social VR, I thought it would be a really interesting idea to experiment with trying to activate that as a medium for them. I'd done a little bit of performance in VR myself before, so I wanted to give it to the professionals really and say, like, here's this new format, let's all just get into VR together and let's try to use this as an opportunity to find new ways to perform for each other.
Right. So when was the course built fully around the VR idea? Was that kind of the full purpose of the course, or is this just a part of what they did?
No, it was an integrated technology lab. So actually the students were meant to do 3 different sections with 3 different either businesses or artists learning how to interface with technology, specifically whatever technology that they were bringing them.
Can you tell me a little bit about how this sort of worked from kind of a design and practical standpoint? So you've got theater students who, have varying levels of backgrounds in technology, and they're coming in to this class now kind of, knowing they're going to do something maybe a little bit different. How did you kind of talk about it? How did you get things set up, especially conceptually about what they would be doing and how they'd be using the new technology?
Yeah, I usually have this, I have this kind of like discussion deck for digging into VR issues. It usually starts with like just general landscape on VR. What's the hardware? What do we use to access it? What are the terms? That sort of simple stuff. And then from there, I actually move into talking about the social landscape in VR, because I think that that's really important, particularly for drama students. I was very lucky also, I should note, that I had 2 game design students in the class, and they could definitely like help fill in some of the gaps where things might not have made sense to students who are less familiar. But yeah, I usually work from talking about hardware to then kind of unpacking what social behaviors occur inside of VR. Like when you all sort of jump and you're in an embodied experience with a bunch of people, it feels really different than the Zoom call does right now. So just kind of like working them up that understanding of VR by understanding it from like a social perspective.
Okay. And then the end goal that they had, I think if I understand it correctly, was essentially come up with a performance that would be done in VR that you would watch, everyone would watch using Oculus Quest, rather than, I guess as they probably do in a normal class, a performance that would be done in front of the class. So that was kind of was that overall the right goal, and were there more specifics to it?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces to it. One of them was the prompt was to write, produce, and deliver a performance specifically for VR. It was less about the actual performance itself and more about the process of thinking about how you would execute a performance, how you would think about the differences for a performance that was intended for VR as opposed to translated into VR or recorded on a 360 camera. Like, how does being in a virtual space where everything is false sort of actually change the way that we act? The other aspect of it wasn't specifically to be watched on other quests as well. Like, we had a whole audience of about 30 people who was all tuned in inside of virtual reality, but we were also streaming it out via Twitch. One of my colleagues at Facebook ran a Twitch stream through the whole time. We had, I think, about like 20 viewers there as well.
Oh, cool. It's really interesting. So this was, did they have a say in kind of like were they able to create different characters? Was there more than one character, or was it kind of their own avatar and it was a 1-person show each time?
Yeah, so there was different characters. And one of the interesting things about the avatars is that it was interesting to decide how or which VR platform we would actually use to execute this on. we chose VR chat, and in VR chat, it's very easy to sort of run around and pick up avatars. So one of the most interesting things about the way that they executed the experience and sort of built their performances was also that it involved a lot of scavenging in virtual spaces. Like I kind of gave them the prompt that was like, you do this performance, you'll need avatars, you'll need a space, like a world to do it in, a stage, etc. Like go around the world of VR chat, find the things you need, go pick them up, try on different avatars, see which avatars work best for your performance. Think of that like a costume. Try it out. And I would sort of sometimes take them through different worlds in VR chat to help them find the things that they might need.
It's just such an interesting kind of way to do things. How do they, well, I guess, how do they do it technically? So did everybody have their own quest? Is that kind of, was that part of how this worked? And then, what did you have to do to get people kind of, familiar with what to do and what they could do?
Yeah, everybody was given their own quest at the outset of this, of like my portion of the class. So it was interesting because I don't think that many of them had used full room scale VR before. I think there was definitely like one person who absolutely had, but they just sort of jumped right in and started to use them. So they had those at their disposal and they were able to kind of do that. The Quest is a very self-explanatory device, shockingly. I think all of VR can seem really out of people's leagues, but it's one of those things where you don't need to connect it to a PC. Like it's entirely wireless. It runs on its own. Its setup is about 5 minutes long. Like it's incredibly easy to use. So it didn't really take much, like from my spiel in the beginning, that was sort of like, here's my lecture, here's my like more standard lecture. This is what the landscape of VR looks like. These are all the sort of parameters of it. And then let's just jump in. Like I felt like by the end of that day, they were like pretty comfortable in it. I did, however, give them homework that evening that was to go experience 1 to 2 social VR experiences and just 1 to 2 any kind of experiences they can find in the Oculus store that were free or not free if they wanted to pay. But that, I think that helped. That first week was just spent acclimating. And honestly, I didn't do very much hand holding. Like I think the next time that we all met in VR and it felt pretty natural.
Wow, that's great. Do you think that's as much because the Quest itself is easy to use? I played with the Go a little bit, haven't played the Quest yet. So that was the Quest. I know was the newer better, better version. Do you think a lot of the ease was because the technology itself was straightforward, and once they kind of crossed the bridge to go jump into it, everybody was kind of like, oh, this is actually pretty straightforward and simple.
I think it's the ease of the device. It's also that they had each other to sort of help. Like if someone was falling behind or not understanding something, they could help each other. I could help them. Like there was a little, like I definitely spent that first day when we were all still physically together while they were setting up their devices, like kind of running around and making sure that everyone's setup was going okay. So it was like little things. I think some other aspects of it are that their project prompt was largely like an explorative project prompt. Like they didn't have to, use link cables, plug their Quest into a computer, upload code. Like they weren't working with the VRChat SDK, although I did offer it to the game design students. They were largely just like, it was more of a play participation role than like in learning how to engineer for VR for the first time.
Okay, so when they gave their performances, so they sort of essentially gave live performances where they controlled an avatar and gave the performance as the avatar. Is that kind of the summary of what these performances were? Can you tell me a little bit about what, a couple of performances were? What were they like? Just trying to picture, what kind of show they might have been able to put on with this.
Yeah, that's very exciting. So interestingly enough, and I don't know whether it was because of the quarantine or because of just, first investigations in virtual reality, all of the pieces seem to be about the sort of fissure between the digital and physical self, which I thought was very interesting. There was this theme that kept appearing. It seemed to be exactly what the students wanted to work with. The teams executed that in really different ways. One I thought was particularly fascinating in that they staged a performance in which they had a sort of decoy audience member that was also part of the performance. So in the performance, and it was the first one that we had done that day. So, I bring my like 30 VR fan friends who want to come watch this. Had sort of sourced their audience from people I know that would be interested in watching a performance in VR. We guide them all into the space. It's this sort of like digital campfire lake ground. And, you know, everyone kind of gets settled in this very like, we're all standing in a very informal way to watch a performance. It felt very like physicalized in the way we would all stand in real life to do that. And we're all getting ready to see what happens next. The sort of one person thanks us for coming, says like, you know, these are these performances, get ready to watch this. And this character begins to emerge from the lake, and she's singing, and it feels very like this modern art dance performance. And she sort of stands on the campfire, because in VR you can just stand on any kind of object that you want to. Somehow it had colliders in it, so she could just walk onto it. And as she's doing that, and she's doing this sort of song, one of the audience members, who's actually like this sort of plant, he's the other actor, starts kind of screaming, and he's screaming to an like off camera person, which turns out to be his mother. And he gets into this like incredible fight with this person who's out of VR, who's in the same room with him. And eventually the fight just sort of takes over the entirety of the performance. And that ends up, and then like sort of in the end, these two characters who are just both performing in very different ways sort of unite. The tension of the moment where everyone in the room is trying to figure out what on earth is going on is incredible.
That's fantastic. I can't even actually define what walls were broken, you know, sort of metaphorically as part of this performance.
Yeah.
It's not the fourth wall. We're sort of in some additional walls, additional dimensions. I don't even know how to characterize it. What were, just to get back to a little bit of the sort of how they kind of accomplished this, where did the scenes come from? So how much say did they have over, you know, what a scene looked like, or were they sort of finding those the way that they found avatars and out of a set of options in you know, within the Quest world?
So they were finding them. One of the most interesting things about it, though, is all of the content in VR chat is user generated, meaning like it's this other kind of like inception of art moment where like they're going and they're looking through this sort of endless catalog of worlds that users have already created. Sort of anything that you could imagine is likely already there, and they're kind of like going to find the right thing. But the way I tried to work with them in terms of their process to prevent them from just finding like the coolest thing and then starting from there was to sit down and write their script, write their concept, sketch what they would want it to look like first, like do everything from the ground up, and then get into VR and then start hunting for the thing. So that way you're trying to actually like, you're finding the thing that's probably already there that helps you execute your vision, rather than getting inspired by something that's that you found.
Right, exactly. So the vision comes from you, and you're not building it with the constraints of just what you happen to see. So yeah, no, that totally makes sense. How big were the teams typically in the class?
3 people.
Okay, so it's 3 each time. Okay.
Yeah.
This is just such an interesting project. What was the reaction of the students to having done this? How did they feel having gone through this process?
They seemed pretty, I don't want to say mind blown, because it sounds like I'm tooting my horn a little bit too much, but like I got a lot of emails from them after that were really, really thankful for the experience. I think that most of them had never been able to just like have a VR headset in their house for a month. It seemed like it had changed some aspects of like the gamut of things that they would consider to be a live performance. And that was really all I wanted to do was do 2 things, that and demystify VR. So I felt like I had like accomplished the 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there people in the class who you feel like might continue doing some things in technology, maybe who wouldn't have done so before the class?
Yeah, I mean, they're definitely the game designers were already on that track, but I definitely received like an email from one of the students who was one of the drama students, who was like, I love this stuff and I want to find a way to make this direction for me.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. Was there anything, as you went through this class, was there anything that surprised you?
Well, you know, the pandemic happened.
Well, other than that,
That is
well, I guess, okay, so I guess you were set up for that though too, right? I mean, you were in sort of virtual class positions. Okay, fair point. How did that change? So yeah, that's a good. I mean, how did that? We'll do that first. How did that change the way the class was already run since it was so
The,
online?
yeah, that was actually my segue into what really surprised me, which is when the pandemic happened, nothing really changed in any substantial way. The only thing that changed was we were previously, so I did the first week with them in normal, regular in classroom circumstances. I gave a lecture. I handed out the headsets. I got everybody set up, made sure everybody's headsets were working. And then for all the following weeks, we were not in that circumstance. And what I intended to do for the following weeks was have them be in their groups and sort of go in and out of VR. And I would go around the room and like talk to them about how the progress was going. We'd workshop ideas. But what we ended up doing was we would all meet in Zoom. And then what I had done was I left the Zoom open for the entire duration of the class and then would meet teams separately inside of VR. So I was actually doing the classwork in VR, and that ended up being incredibly useful for two reasons. One was it made us feel like we were physically there, and it just felt like we could have a conversation than we would have in the classroom. And the other was I think it got them adjusted to VR faster and more comfortable faster because they actually had to put in the hours. Like, even if they weren't doing it on their own time, they were putting in like 3 hours a week in class time. But yeah, once we figured that out, that it was just a sort of like run the Zoom the entire time, go back and forth if we want to chat that way, leave that as a space for students to chat in their groups as well with breakout rooms, and then just go and meet in VR for sessions. It was perfect. Like I didn't even really notice.
Yeah. All right. So you had just to make sure I have this right. So you had Zoom running. So Zoom was kind of like the substitute for being in person as far as the class goes, but then everybody was also meeting in VR as they would have done if they were in the room together as they were practicing. So you had both going simultaneously.
Yeah. Like we would leave a classroom open the entire time. And when a chunk of us were going into VR, actually something that we would do is I would say like, okay, I'm going to take group B into VR right now. We're all going to go, we're going to meet there. We're all going to we're going to mute our microphones. We're going to turn off our cameras, and then we'll leave like group A to be here or a breakout room, and they can do their thing, so that people would always have a space for themselves.
Wow, that's great. That's a great way to do it. Back to surprises. So were there other things, aside from the pandemic, were there other things that surprised you about the students' reactions or even your own reaction to sort of how things unfolded and as people started to put their performances together?
Not necessarily with the way things unfolded. I think that they kind of went as expected. With the performances themselves, however, I think that the two performances that we streamed were so much more like emotional and like fully submitted to the medium than I thought that they would be. I thought that this would look like an experimental run at something, like people just trying out something for the first time, but I really felt that the groups really, they accepted the medium, and not only did they accept it, they really like made use of it. There were both presentations from the stream were emotional. They dealt with the medium that they were in. Yeah, that was my biggest surprise, was just how incredible the performances were.
Yeah. So what's an example of something that they did that took advantage of the medium that maybe, wasn't something you thought that they'd be able to do?
Well, first, that sort of like breaking all the walls experience. I didn't think that they had sort of like created something that looked like something that happens regularly in VR chat, but was like drawn in this artful way. And I was so amazed that they had like interfaced with the medium so quickly that they were able to sort of pick up the nuances of the behaviors there. That really surprised me. And on the other side of it, there was another group that had done in their performance. The performance takes place within a conversation of two people who are deciding whether or not to meet in real life. And there's like a pretty heavy tension between the two of them. and they're just having this conversation where it's like two people who clearly like know each other quite well because they're talking in this very informal, very close way in this very embodied space, but they just can't quite figure out how to exist in reality together. I don't know. I think that both of those concepts interface so heavily with so many of the questions of virtual reality.
Yeah, no, I think the last one's actually, I mean, I think that's a movie concept. I think that's a very,
Yeah.
2020 movie concept. We only exist in virtual space. We can't really connect in real life. I think there's something to that. I think we'll see that soon. Well, great. Well, then, I guess looking back at the experience, I know you kind of, you did so much in this class. Are there things that you would want to try to do, the next time you could take it, are there further steps you might want to go, and what might those be?
I would love to do it again, absolutely. And the specific thing that I would want to change is, so in my work on the AR/VR social experiences team at Facebook, I actually work on a product called Facebook Horizon. And that is to those who are not familiar, it hasn't launched yet, but what we've been working on is this sort of sea of user created worlds, but we've created the tools for creating your own worlds or models or whatever inside of the app. So it's this social space, it's sort of a social network, but it's also a creative opportunity space. So what I would love to do is actually go back, do a full semester rather than just like a 4 or 5 week stint, and then actually use Horizon so that the creators themselves would be able to, rather than scavenge for the things that they want, they could actually from scratch build the scene that they want, build their set. If they want to build seats, they can build seats. Like they can make it whatever they want. It's like truly boundless creation in that way.
That sounds like it's just, it's unlimited creativity, and it's almost, the next, the next closest thing to I guess sort of a live performance, right? But did you find, I guess one last question related to this, did the students find, or did you find that there are sort of advantages that maybe people hadn't foreseen of doing a performance in a virtual world? Is there a different kind of freedom or something that you can do that, I think people tend to think of it as an imitation of reality, but can we go the other direction? Are there things you can do and that people found they could experience and include that they could not do in real life?
I think that one of the primary ones that they might have seen is cost. That there was suddenly, you could have any space that you could find or want, and it came at no cost. You could stream simultaneously while performing, like to people who don't have headsets, using streaming services that are well used and known with no cost. Everything is, you can just sort of pick up and do it, and it has that, it's freeing in that it isn't sort of held by these like brick and mortar institutions and the costs of putting on a performance. There's definitely, I think the other aspect of it is, this is sort of sillier, you don't need to be a human. That's certainly not limiting. You can be anything that you want. You can tell stories that you wouldn't normally be able to tell. I think that is sort of what I'm getting at with the cost thing, where it's like anything that bound you previously in terms of telling the story you wanted to tell probably doesn't exist in a fictional reality.
Did people choose avatars that were not human?
Yes, I think everybody did. One was fairly humanoid.
Yeah, no, this is just so interesting. I guess one last thing just to clarify. So I think you mentioned that the audience who was watching it, the people in the class, I assume, watched it on their Quest and watched it in in the VR environment. But then, since it was also streamed, people could see it as a slightly less immersive performance, kind of the way that we would watch something on I guess 3-dimensional TV. Is that kind of about the feel that people had as the additional users who weren't part of the class?
So the only people that I've actually been able to find out or talk to them about what they thought from watching just the broadcast is mostly the NYU staff. Was like being able to give them that link, because I think this entire time I'd been working with them in the class, I think it was like, it felt a little bit like there was this partition where I was working with students, we were all in VR, and then if you weren't, you couldn't really see what we were doing. And I think for them it was this incredibly illuminating moment of being able to say, like, this is the thing. And also in this indirect way, like you can participate and you can watch it. It obviously doesn't feel the same way, but it feels like watching any way that you would watch entertainment on the internet. Like it doesn't feel that different from watching a live video. If you're watching like a Facebook or an Instagram live of something, like the difference between this sort of Twitch broadcast out of VR and that is kind of minimal. Like in both of those circumstances, you're not in the place, but it still gives you this like very clear view of what's going on there, specifically because it's a POV view. And my colleague who was streaming it was streaming it straight from like the iBuffer of her headset. So everything that she sees is being seen by them, or anyone who's watching the stream. So there's something about that, I think, that first person POV that helps it feel more real, like more like
Yeah.
the real experience.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it more. It's more, even without the headset, that is more immersive than maybe some other, typical broadcast might be. That's good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Just to wrap up, is there anything, anything you sort of wanted, if someone's thinking about maybe, other ways to use VR? Is there anything maybe that, having been through this experience with the class, you think people would want to know, sort of a message to leave people with based on your experience?
I think what made a lot of people really interested in this Chish drama VR experiment was that I think it was a sort of shiny version of the using VR for education experience. It was this sort of like, there was this performance and a Twitch stream and all these crazy avatars, and it's very fun, and it's a very fun like story to hear. But I actually think that I won't say every, but a lot of different industries can be augmented by VR. And it's really just our responsibility as people who are experimenting with new technologies in education to just try it out. We won't actually know until we try. We've seen like this experiment went really well. At Oculus, we've seen some incredible improvements in a lot of like surgical training softwares in VR. Like there's so many things that work. There's so many things that we don't know that they work yet. So just try them and find out.
Yeah, there's a whole world out there, and it does feel like we're at the stage where, sometimes people maybe just need a little encouragement to feel like this is not, especially now with the Quest, this is not that, it's not that complicated. It's something you can kind of jump into and get familiar with pretty quickly, and feel like, it's a new world, but it's not a world that's hard to understand. And there is something, I think, a little mystical about it still to people that keeps them maybe just one step away from taking the leap. And this helps tremendously. Well, Michelle, let me wrap up on that. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me and to explain everything that you've done, which it sounds like it's just a fascinating course, and people took it in directions maybe we never would imagine. So thanks once again.
Thank you for having me.